Welcome to the Stronger Together podcast brought to you by Sandpoint Strength and Conditioning. I'm your coach, Kenny Markwart, and today I'm going to fly solo and try this. We'll do a little bit of a solo cast. I'd like this to be educational and informative. So I just spent the weekend in Las Vegas with two of the premier strength and conditioning coaches in the world. They're two guys I've been following for many, many, many years, and they put on a workshop called Fitness for Life. And the whole point of it was to educate us coaches on how to help our clients live longer, live better, and just be more successful in their everyday lives. So I want to kind of like decompress and recap that for the audience, just so you guys kind of have some more context on some of the stuff I've been talking about for a long time, which is, again, my goal for my clients and our clients in the gym is to live longer and live better. So I'll try to keep this useful and not too boring and not too rambly. But let's just start off with some. Well, actually, first let me introduce who I was with. One is Joel Jamison, who is the founder of 8 Weeks Out and the Morpheus HRV tracker and app. He's an absolute genius. I started reading his stuff 15 years ago in a book called Ultimate MMA Conditioning, which was at the time really designed for just combat athletes and fighters. But it wasn't, still is, in my opinion, one of the best books on developing conditioning or aerobic and anaerobic fitness that is available today. So yeah, he was there and he talked mostly about conditioning. And then we were also with Mike Robertson, who is the founder of a program called R7, which is he uses for his strength development. He's an ex powerlifter, but again, his context was more on strength work. So those were the two guys. And again, the framework for this whole thing was live longer, live better. So let's define those two things, and they go neatly into those two categories of strength and conditioning. And so the two terms that we like to use are health span and lifespan. And those can be defined. Lifespan is how long you're going to live, just period. That's it, full stop. Health span in this context is going to be how well you're going to live. And the interesting thing I have tended to find over the years is I'll hear people say a lot of things like, I don't want to live that long. I hear a lot of people say, I don't want to live to 100. I don't want to live to 110. I don't want to live to 70, whatever it is. And I think that when I delve deeper into that conversation with that person, it's often because they think their quality of life will be one that they are bedridden and being kept alive by machines watching reruns of The Price is Right. And yeah, I agree. That sounds really abysmal. I'm not interested in that at all. I am, however, super interested in myself. I want to live as long as I possibly can, as well as I possibly can. I love my life. I love the things that I do in my life. I love my family. I love all of my friends, and I would love to hang out with them and do all the things I'm still doing or doing now. I would love to continue to do those in some capacity for as long as I possibly can. So that's how we're going to define those. And that's the context of this whole thing. So I want to start with the strength aspect of this. And again, so strength is going to correlate strongly with your health span and how well you are going to live. And in your later years, that health span is going to represent living independently and being resilient and not falling on your hip and having that hip fracture and subsequent recovery rob you of the rest of your life. I just sent an email out today that defined the 5-year survival rate. So after you have a hip fracture, after that repair, the survival rate for somebody over 65 is like on an average of 40%. Just breaking your hip can be a massively catastrophic injury for somebody in extinguishing their life. And what I believe that is a representation of is a lack of range of motion and resilience that can be strengthened through strength training. And you can prevent those things from happening. And if they do happen, you can really massively impact your ability to recover from those things through strength training, because your bones will be stronger, you'll be more balanced, and your muscles and whole body will just be more capable of adapting and recovering from surgical intervention. So, and that's on like the the super dramatic scope of it. The other side of that is, again, just being able to retain the ability to go and do and enjoy and love. And I think often of, people that get to retirement age and they can't do the things they had dreamt of one day doing because they just don't have the physical capacity of doing that. And I think that that's really unfortunate. But through developing strength and through developing range of motion, you can retain all of those things. Our bodies are remarkably adaptable regardless of age. I've seen so much progress in people regardless of whenever they started. If they were not, a lot of people don't self-define as athletes, and they feel as though that they're never going to have the capability of getting strong or regaining a range of motion. And yet, through all of my experience of working with, at this point, probably thousands of people, either actively or passively in the gym, I've seen it time and time and time and time again where people can regain and restore those ranges of motion and actually add strength and muscle mass to their frames. Again, that's kicking it down the line to somebody that's a little bit older and wanting to get started, but it starts young. So the younger you are, the sooner you get started, the better, because you will allow for that to be gained and retained, and you're essentially making these investments in this health span in your as early as you can. And as you've hopefully come to understand, the sooner you start investing, the more that will compound in the future. And I think that's super relevant to strength training as well. So in other words, the more you start investing sooner, the more it will impact your life at the later stages. So how does that transpire? What are the priorities? Like, what are we looking for with that? And it honestly is pretty simple. Like, we tend to talk about things, and what we talked about over the weekend was still movement patterns. Like, that hasn't changed at all. We're still looking at bending, squatting, pushing, pulling, carrying, lunging, and rotating. Those are all the things that you're going to experience in life. And if you train those and make sure that you can utilize those to a full range of motion, you're in a great spot. And that's where we start, is the range of motion work. So we really want to capture an ideal range of motion before we start doing anything else. And that full range of motion is just like the expression of, a full depth squat, and the ability to reach all the way over your head, and the ability to reach down and touch your toes. And then once we've got that range of motion established in a full expression, then we can start to test and stress that in a way that will provide a strength adaptation. So in other words, the first step is to squat to a full range of motion. And then the second step is to start to load that range of motion. And through the loading of that range of motion, you will cause your body to adapt to that stress or that external load, and it will turn into that will become stronger. And so your body gets stronger, your bones get stronger, you develop muscle, and then you develop the capability of doing more. And so if you break everything down into just a stress adaptation idea, like, if you subject your body to stress, it will adapt. And if you do that responsibly, it will continue to do so for a very, very, very long period of time, of which I don't know that we've actually seen the limits of through diligent and well managed strength training. So that's a pretty short synopsis of what I experienced over the weekend, but quite frankly, it's just not all that complicated. We can get crazy into loads and rep ranges and sets and frequency and percentage of maxes and program design management. But quite honestly, that's probably a topic for another day. But the short version of it is that you just need to train to get that full range of motion as often as you possibly can, without overdoing and causing overstress. Uh, the way, like, tactfully or tactically, if you want some very specific takeaways, I would just try and do some strength or range of motion training 3 to 5 times a week and move in all of your conceivable movement patterns: squat, bend, push, pull, carry, rotate, lunge. And I probably have missed some. But if you look at what you want to do in your life now, or you want to do in your life in the future, like, that'll give you a good indication on which ways that you should be moving in a way that you can preserve those things and fortify those things. So that's your health span. Moving on to your lifespan. So how long you want to live. And this is just going to be measured in years. To develop your lifespan, we're going to be looking at your conditioning or cardiovascular fitness. That's it. Like that's the biggest marker. Yes, strength training will contribute to that, but the most impactful way that you can extend your lifespan is through conditioning or cardiovascular fitness. The marker of that, and through study after study after study, it's shown that a high VO2 max correlates with a longer life or a fewer incidents of all cause mortality. So in other words, the higher you can get your VO2 max, the longer you're going to live. Unless you get hit by a bus or something, obviously there's some extraneous things here, but realistically, like just targeting that will be the thing to focus on. And we spent hours and hours and hours talking about VO2 max. So what is VO2 max? VO2 max is at its most basic form, the maximum amount of oxygen a person can use while exercising intensely. That's how you should think about that. So it's just a marker of efficiency, et cetera, et cetera. And it may not seem as though like exercising intensely correlates to a long life, but it really comes down to the cellular function and your heart's ability to function in a way that supports the body. Of course, there's some other things in there, but like that's how that'll correlate. Some other markers. So in order to define, like when I talked about the health span and strength, like that's really pretty easy to define because you can look at the range of motion, then you can look at your capacities through your strength. With the VO2 max, that is much harder to measure or quantify for people. It's just kind of I don't know, a number out in the ether. You understand what the definition is, but you don't know what that means for you. The most easy way to do that. So there's a couple ways. One, you can go super complicated. If you want to go down to, there's a place in Coeur d'Alene. I actually had my VO2 max tested last year. The name escapes me, but anyways, if you look up VO2 max testing, you should be able to be pointed in the right direction. They will throw you on a bike and put a mask on your face and then make you go as hard as you can and continue to increase the intensity for what should be about 12 to 15 minutes. And they'll give you a printout and all these sexy graphs telling you exactly what happened, how much oxygen your body's using, how much carbon dioxide your body is using when you start to go from aerobic to anaerobic, yada, yada, yada. That is probably needlessly overcomplicated unless you're a complete nerd. The more easy way to do this is to get on a rowing machine and row for 12 minutes, or get on a bike and bike for 12 minutes, or run for 12 minutes and see how far that you can go and just try and max that sucker out. And I don't mean just go out of the gate as hard as you possibly can, because that would be a poor strategy, but try and cover as much distance as you can in that 12-minute time period. And then use that as your marker to see if you are improving. So in other words, like again, that's not going to give you a direct correlation to your VO2 max, but it will be able to give you a marker on whether or not you are improving. Yes, you can go, like there's much more of a nuance to that in terms of if you've never rowed before on an erg and you row for 12 minutes and then we do that again a month later, you will probably develop a better rowing technique, which would contribute to a further distance covered in that 12 minutes that would not necessarily correlate to a VO2 max. But I think realistically, like that's a totally fine measure. Throwing out all the variables and everything else, like if you just look at that 12-minute time period and use that as your measure and continue to look for improvement, like that's going to be plenty for 90% of people. So that was about VO2 max. So VO2 max is a big, massive number to be looking at in terms of tracking your lifespan, and to do that 12 minutes on a bike, rower, or go run and see how that goes. The other markers to be watching for your lifespan is your resting heart rate, which is just how many beats per minute your heart beats in 1 minute, and your heart rate recovery, which is how fast your heart gets, how many beats that your heart rate decreases after intense exercise. So essentially, you want to go as hard as you can for a period of time, probably 1 to 2 minutes, as hard as you possibly can, and then get off of or stop exercising as hard as you can and see how many beats your heart rate will drop in the minute immediately after that bout of exercise. And just that's your number. And again, in terms of like overall ideals, like I'm not going to go into that because it's going to be dependent upon age and previous exercise history. But if you just again try and improve those things, you will be massively improving your lifespan. In terms of how to improve these things, so these are the takeaways and the things I think that are probably the most important part of what I'd like to share with everybody is that in order to build a VO2 max, it's not about intensity. And that is very counter to, I think, what most people would assume and most of what our society is after. And in fact, I think honestly, what most people would consider that we are doing within my own gym here, or our own gym, if you're a listener of the podcast as a member, our gym, like it sounds as though we are doing strength and then intense exercise every day. To go take that a step back before I address what I just said, the the improvement of your VO2 max must be supported by a massive base of aerobic fitness. In other words, if you think of building a pyramid, like if your cardiovascular fitness is a pyramid, VO2 max is going to be at the peak of that pyramid. The height of a pyramid is going to be a direct correlation with the size of its base. So another way to say that, like, or way to think about that is the bigger that you build the base, the higher you can build the peak. And so, yes, while you can certainly improve VO2 max by just doing intensity and just trying to train for VO2 max, you will be massively robbing yourself of the ability to maximize the potential of that VO2 max. And the base is going to be consisted of what's become commonly known as zone 2 cardio. And a zone 2 cardio is going to be the stuff that you can do for a sustainable period of time, like 30 to 60 minutes or longer, and will not cause like an overall massive fatigue. And a good way to measure that, yes, you can have a heart rate monitor that will tell you what zones that you are in. Yes, you can test your lactate threshold, or blood lactate rather, by pricking yourself and actually testing that. I wouldn't recommend that. It's kind of a pain in the ass. But the best and honest way to measure this is to be able to talk while you're doing the exercise. Like it's an uncomfortable conversational pace. Like it's not a walk. I think that 10,000 steps a day is probably great, but that's not zone 2. That is zone 1. And that's not going to do a whole heck of a lot to contribute to your aerobic base unless you are massively untrained. Zone 2 is going to be where it's a slightly difficult or uncomfortable to have a conversation. That is how you're going to build your aerobic base. Without going too far in the weeds here, that's just going to train your body to use oxygen and fat as a fueling source. And why that is important to building your VO2 max and your ultimate expression of how intensely you can exercise is that the longer you can prolong your body's use of oxygen and fat and not sugar, the higher output you will have. In other words, like again, coming back to the 12-minute test of VO2 max, or if you back it down into like a mile run test, which is a pretty good expression of your VO2 max, the longer that you can do that event and the more like intensity you can feel in that event, but still maintain utilizing oxygen, the more output that you will have before you have to start using your other substrates, which I think I overcomplicated that a little bit, but you only have a limited amount of time and a limited amount of sugar and a limited amount of carbohydrates to use at an intense rate. And you like the extension of that is really difficult to do. And it's probably much more inefficient than just developing your aerobic system to support your oxidative, or sorry, not your oxidative, your glycolytic system, which again, probably overcomplicated. But the further that you can kick that down, the better. Again, back to the pyramid thing. If you just, I would like to consolidate that and just say build the base as big as you possibly can, and then use intensity to sharpen the point of that pyramid. So what I said a second ago about how I think most people would assume that intensity is the answer, and the intensity is what, CrossFit was founded upon, and a lot of what I think people would still consider that we do in the gym, is I think that people go too hard and they don't understand their gears. And the feedback that I constantly get from people is that it doesn't look like I'm working that hard when I'm doing any of my conditioning in the gym. And that's true. I'm really not working that hard. I don't want to be redlined all the time. It's how I'm able to preserve my ability to train. It's how I'm able to pace my workouts in a way that I have some stuff left in the tank for when I need to sprint to the finish line if I uh, am in some sort of a competitive environment. But by managing my output, I'm actually really keeping a lot of energy in reserve, and I'm probably mostly in like a zone 2, zone 3, just sometimes touching into the zone 4 as I get to the finish on workouts. And I wish that more people understood that better. And I actually wish that more people tracked their heart rate better, or just tried to preserve themselves in that talk test where they could have a conversation. It would be an uncomfortable conversation, but that they could preserve their ability to have a conversation through those workouts. I think culturally, um, people have this idea that they have to go as hard as they possibly can to get every single second out of every single minute of effort in a workout. And I think that is massively misguided and misunderstood. The Circling back for a second, like the development of that aerobic system is massively important, but the more that you can train your body to do higher outputs in an aerobic state, the better off that you'll be. And the way that you can do that is not through intensity, not just pinning the throttle all day long and hoping that it will in effect go the reverse and develop that aerobic system. It's actually the other way around, and trying to keep yourself in that aerobic state while upping your outputs. Hopefully that made some semblance of sense. But again, once you start to, what I've seen and what I've read and what I've learned is that once people start to go all intensity all the time, their body just naturally starts to utilize that fuel source because that's all it's ever known. So if you're that kind of person that goes 3, 2, 1, go, and then mash the throttle, that's what your body starts to adapt to. Again, coming back to the strength side of things, like that's what our bodies adapt, our bodies learn, and our bodies start to try and compensate for the experiences that they've just had and will have in the future. So if you're a 3, 2, 1, mash the throttle kind of person, that's how you're going to learn. Your body's going to learn how to exercise in that way. And then if you do try and go for long periods of time, your heart rate goes to the ceiling and you start to burn sugar as fuel, which is very inefficient for very long periods of time. And you have to really try and reverse that to end up building your VO2 max around again which is what the goal should have been in the first place. Again, which I've seen in people that I've worked with, is that they have to start from scratch, and they have to start over teaching their body to stay aerobic rather than go anaerobic. And it's very difficult to do if you haven't been doing that. So I would start that. If you're listening to this and you feel like that's you, start now. And if you feel as though there's a natural predisposition within you that says, I have to go as hard as I possibly can, just know that you're wrong. And that has been shown time and time and time and time again. And that's a lot of what we talked about over the weekend, which was, again, mostly a review for me because I've been talking about this stuff for years and years and years. But if that's you, go slower. Keep your conversational pace going until the very, very end, if at all. You will recover better. You will feel better. You will perform better in the long run. And you will increase your aerobic base that will then allow for when that time comes and you do the intensity work, which I tend to do and would recommend doing once a week, that the pyramid will become sharper and taller over time. So that was a long-winded way to say that more aerobic work is the more important part of living a longer life, and that a VO2 max is the expression of that, and that more aerobic minutes is how you'll develop the more potential for a higher higher VO2 max. Now, something to consider, or something that kind of irritated the hell out of me and irritated the hell out of both the presenters, again, who are world renowned, have been doing this for a very, very, very long period of time, is how a certain popular name in the women's fitness arena, you can look this up if you want, said about 6 months ago or so that women should not be doing zone 2 training. This is insane. We looked at study after study after study over the weekend to disprove this and say that this has no gender. If there were a gender consideration to this, that women actually respond better and see more benefits from zone 2 training, a higher aerobic base, and more zone 2 minutes on a weekly basis than men do. So whether or not this was a headline grab, whether or not this was something that she was trying to do to sell a book, I don't really know. But we went deep on this stuff, and it was shown through study after study after study that women actually respond better to zone 2 training and build up a bigger aerobic base, and therefore have less incidence of all-cause mortality than even men do. So women, do your zone 2 training. Walking is great, but you should probably up that intensity just slightly to that conversational pace, and you will serve yourselves to live longer. And just, yeah, ignore what that person said, because zone 2 training is massively important for you as well. Okay, this has been almost 30 minutes, and I've probably prattled on for too long. But as a review, build your ranges of motion and strength within those ranges of motion once you can comfortably achieve those ranges of motion. So position first, then resistance second. It will allow you to live independently, stronger, and do the things that you want to be doing for the rest of your life better. You will build bone density, you will build muscle mass, which will then decrease your body composition, and just be awesome. So strength training 3 to 5 times a week, but also conditioning to build a high VO2 max so that you can live longer. And the best way to build a high VO2 max is to accumulate a whole pile of aerobic minutes per week. I believe that the biggest effect were like, I think it was 150 minutes per week of zone 2 exercise was about where I want to say the highest return was. More than that, if you can tolerate it, is definitely better, but you're starting to get into splitting hairs at that point. And there's a little bit of a diminishing returns. Like, it's not a correlate of more is always better after 150 minutes per week. So 150 minutes of zone 2 exercise is something that you should shoot for. I realize that is a whole ton, but that's a good goal. And then do 1 or 2 times, and 2 is probably stretching that, of where you're doing high intensity interval work. And I can get into the protocol for that is usually 4 rounds, 4 minutes with 4 minutes of rest. It's something very intense. Again, program design wise, that's probably a little bit of a longer conversation, but just know that I think the biggest takeaway is less intensity more frequently, and then high intensity, but less frequent. Sorry. Low intensity, very frequently, high intensity, less frequently. I still don't think I said that very well. But if you're at the gym, just know that that's what we're doing. And if you are at the gym and you're in our conditioning stuff and you feel like you're going all out all the time, slow down. Very much slow down. Know that what we are still doing is aerobic fitness with contraction. So we're still at the heart of it, where you're doing a compound strength lift for our A part of the workout. And then our B part of the workout is normally going to be an aerobic, like zone 2 or zone 3 conditioning effort with contractions that are designed to accompany the compound lift that we did in A. So we're trying to do more hypertrophy and base building, so that you have the ability that the adaptations you'll get from that will be muscle gain. You'll get resilience from that. And then also we're trying to train in those movement patterns under some duress as well, which will help your body adapt to those kinds of things in everyday life. All right. That was 30 minutes. If you have questions on that, please shoot me an email. I know it wasn't the most concise thing I've ever said, but yeah, Kenny@sandpointstrength.com. And if you are ready, you're not a member at the gym, but you are ready to get started on this journey, same thing, Kenny@sandpointstrength.com. I'd be happy to help however I possibly can, whether it's in the gym or outside of the gym. I just love this stuff and want to honestly change the world, help us all live longer and live better. So thanks for listening, and I will be back next week with a real live person.